Hey, what's going on? Welcome in. My name is Chris and I host the UCB1 Rock Show. Today, I get to bring you the full interview that I recently conducted with small town New York's own Matt Sassano. His songs tend to focus on his struggles with physical disabilities and his mental health and how his faith in the Lord helps him power through that. The first question, as always, was just to ask him to bring us up to date with Matt Sassano.
Yeah, man, this is awesome. Thank you again for inviting me on the show. I'm excited to be a part of the show and the new YouTube channel and, be a part of this. My music journey just really starts, I guess you could say, I've always been drawn to it. I grew up in a small town called Canisteo, New York, more cows than people, not much going on there. And, the two components that really shaped my love for music was the fact that I grew up with two disabilities. I have cerebral palsy and I have another disability called dyscalculia. And so I just remember as a kid growing up in this small town, kind of feeling lost in my own skin, never really feeling quite comfortable in my own skin. And about the first time I was introduced to rock, I was at a church meeting and these kids gave me a tooth and nail compilation and my entire world changed. It was just I was just totally obsessed with every single compilation, everything I could get my hands on. It was just a whole new world for me. And, I think also what made rock special to me is it spoke to a lot of the issues and the pains that I was going through. I was raised in church, and I got to see a lot of the great sides of church and everything. But behind the scenes, there was a lot of hidden contention with my mom and dad's marriage. I remember from a really young age, just, coming from knockdown, drag out arguments with the parents and then going straight to church and kind of putting on the face. And so I remember what I loved about rock, it was just so unfiltered and it was just so, something that people, it just was true. You were true to yourself, true to your real emotions. And that's what really resonated with me as somebody who kind of never felt like he fit anywhere, whether it be at home, at church, at school. Rock gave me that outlet to be this could be my thing. And so I started my first band project in 2010. One of my first songs I ever wrote, called Bridges, in a band called Transparent, was put on it was just by a weird miracle that it was put on this NASCAR video game soundtrack. So I'm on I'm on this video game soundtrack as a band that only had one recorded song with Stained and Uncle Cracker and Switchfoot and everything. Well, that band had its little trajectory. I didn't know at the time, we were really young. We didn't know how to manage it. And so that band broke up. And then, we moved to Tennessee with my mom and stepdad. And then it started kind of the journey into my new projects and now my solo project. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, what a journey, man. So that is just so much. So I just want to kind of take a couple of steps back and just get to the first thing that you kind of went into there. You said that you grew up with 2 times disabilities. Now I've heard of cerebral palsy, which I think was one of them you said, and the other was dyscalculia. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely, man.
Yeah.
And that was
how did they kind of affect you? How did that actually affect your day-to-day life? Because you said that kind of caused tension with your friends around school, something like that.
Sure. So I wasn't even really formally diagnosed up until I was 19 years old. How I found out is I kind of got out of school to get my GED, and for whatever reason, I was smart in everything except for math, and I just kept repeatedly failing math, and it was just this repeated cycle of failure. And through that whole process, we found out that I have this rare disability called dyscalculia. Number one, I can't do math, and number two, my directions and navigation are really off. And so the way I like to describe it is every time you got into a car with somebody, it feels like getting kidnapped. You don't know where you are. You kind of feel the world around you can't navigate. And so it always feels I don't know where I'm going. My brain wipes directions out. And so I just struggled in school. I remember every day going to school and kind of just, anticipating what it was going to take to make it to my class on time, because I'd get lost. And you
And then
know,
you get into trouble with the teachers for not being there on time, presumably.
yeah, I mean, they knew that I had like disabilities and stuff, but they
Right.
never knew like the extent of it up until I was 19. So they just kind of dismissed it as like this kid that just was slacking off and
Yeah.
everything. And then,
Get your act
you know,
together.
yeah, and the thing was I was so self-aware, and it was like one of those things where I always wanted to like fit in and
Mm.
be that guy. So I was trying to constantly like hide and put up a shield. And luckily I have a pretty decent sense of humor, so I got by, but it was a really tough time getting through school. So that's kind of what that was like. And it was
And then obviously, as
a
you were
wild
saying,
ride.
that made you feel like you were on the outside of that kind of world at school, I guess. That's what did that, is it?
Absolutely, man. And like I said, I just like a lot of me just wanted to grow up feeling normal. I kind of despised my entire existence, not being one of the quote unquote normal people.
It's really
Um,
common to kind of hear that in the people who aren't generally drawn towards rock and alternative music, isn't it? That kind of whole alternative lifestyle thing. There's a lot, even in like, non-Christian music, there's vibes of this kind of not feeling at one in your own skin or in within other people, isn't it? It's interesting. You kind of find that many metalheads and rock people, they're really sensitive, aren't they, to the world, and it's like this image that comes across to the world of being like gruff and anti. So it's really just putting barriers up to kind of protect yourself, isn't it? Really, from that.
yeah, man, absolutely. And I think with that comes like the desperation. I do this to reach people, but it's also like my only outlet that I found that I was good at. And so it
Mm,
was like once I found music, I was like, man, this has got to either take off. And I had that part of me where it's like, this is gonna get me. This is my escape from mediocrity. This is my escape from being that lost weird kid. I have this outlet that I can, like express my emotions, and people relate to and everything. And so there was also that just desperation to make something happen. And
sure.
yeah,
So when you said that you kind of got that Tooth and Nail mixtape, that compilation, like a church group or something, did I hear right that not only were you at church, but like your parents were kind of integral in church? They was like the pastors, weren't they, at the church? Did I read that?
yeah. So my mom and my dad were we lived that ministry life and everything. I definitely grew up just every time the doors were open, um, like was in church. I grew up believing in a lot of the Bible, and I still do. There's always like I believe 100% in the Bible and everything that it says. But my main battle was kind of like separating the message from the messenger, because like I
Mm,
said, we'd do the church thing and go home, and then I'd see knockdown drag out fights with my mom and dad, or just there was a lot of like physical altercations behind the scenes that I had to kind of show up to church with black and blue marks and try to make sense of like what's real and what's fake. And I think that's another thing that kind of rock addressed for me. you
yeah.
know Even in this recent era, songs like Dear God that I put out address, in the music video you see a pastor abusing his son, and then it flashes to like a church and flashbacks and all sorts of stuff. Like, this has always just been my outlet to kind of
Mm,
combat all that things. And I like to say that I like to write music for the underdog. That's my
mm.
whole intent and my whole message behind all of this.
Hey, this interview was recorded for the UCB1 Rock Show, the only show on national radio in the UK currently playing Christian hard rock and heavy metal. If you'd like to tune in, even if you're not inside the UK, go down to the first pinned comment or the description. You're going to find out how you can do that. Anyway, next up, I wanted to find out how young Matt Sassano went from witnessing violent altercations in the home to going through to church and then seeing the perpetrator and the victim of that domestic violence on stage in church talking about the love of Christ. I wanted to know, how did he square that circle and keep hold of his faith?
Yeah, I think the main thing was just kind of like when you're raised in it, you don't necessarily, that it's bad, but you don't really know how bad it is until you escape it. I mean, you know what I mean? For us, it was just kind of like a way of life. I remember like going to church with black and blue marks, and everybody kind of like turning a blind eye to what was going on. And then, but I don't know, for whatever reason, I always maintained that there was a God. And I think also the fact that like my mom was on the other end of that spectrum
Mm.
and was always my spiritual encouragement. Like she had her flaws and stuff, but she always tried and like taught us about, perseverance. And so we were kind of one end of the family was persevering, and then the other half was just kind of like, had that violent streak, and it was really tough to get through. But I don't know, for whatever reason, God just continued to like keep me and let me know that he was there no matter what. No matter if I was in the psych ward when I went with depression over, self-harm and all these things, there was that thing in the back of my mind that just kept telling me like, you're going through a tough time, but continue to hold on. And that's not to say I wasn't like angry and I didn't go through like the teenage angry phase, but for whatever reason I just never like threw the baby out with the bathwater completely.
Oh, so good. That is so good, man, because like you see these high profile. I mean, I saw the whole Carl Lentz thing coming out of
Yeah,
Hillsong and it just seems like there's a whole bunch of examples of people they what we're supposed to do is go and see the messages from the pastors or whatever, but it shouldn't matter which pastor's up there, should it? Really, you shouldn't be going to a church just because, I don't know, Stephen Furtick is preaching or whoever, a big
absolutely.
celebrity. It's like, Jesus is the celebrity. You're there to see, you're there to worship the God in the man, not the man as a God. And when people kind of maybe put the wrong emphasis on the pastor or the preacher because they're very charismatic or something, when that person inevitably falls, then obviously it can. You see loads of people walking away from the faith and, oh, I'm not having this. Do you know what I mean? When those things in the media happen. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We kind of live in that era of deconstruction of faith, and you see it a lot, and it's just kind of one of those things that's pretty sad to see. But for whatever reason, that just wasn't for me. I always believed, I had anger towards God sometimes, and I had my questions, and I would scream in the middle of the night, like, what is going on? But at the same time, like, there was that constant communication with God.
Mm.
And, like I said, like the music and the writing gave me really that outlet to where it was like, in class, writing a song about the anger, not paying attention to what's
Mm.
going on in class, and just kind of like pouring my everything into the music and the artistry of it.
That's fantastic. So 2019, you drop Transcend, which was that an LP or an EP? Which
That was like
that's
a full kind of album, and it was,
yeah,
I guess, like me trying to find my voice.
yeah.
I don't know that that was like my best album by any means. It took me a while to kind of find, my voice where I am now. There's
I was gonna ask, how do you define your music? Because on the rock show, man, like I struggle, like I'm like, oh yeah, and I'll go, I'll listen to like another band, and I'll be like, oh yeah, this is a metalcore slash prog rock hardcore, and I'm like, I'm just making up genres, I'm just making it up as I go along, and I'm
yeah,
like,
man.
how do you describe your music?
I guess it's like a mishmash of like, EDM, electronic elements fused with rock. And like I try to take inspiration from all sorts of directions. But, like I said, I think moving forward, the stuff transcend and on, or I mean, not in defiance on
Yep.
is kind of more the direction that I'm going now. That was kind of the breaking point where I was kind of like, I've got to start writing what's real to me. Like you kind of write for so long and you kind of lose sight of what's good. And so Transcend was that experimental album, and it was also my first album as a solo artist without a band. And so I was trying to figure out like if I don't have a band behind me, there's got to be a little bit of more of an electronic element to it so that it's not like I'm up on stage, you know, doing full band music with no full band. And so I was kind of trying to descend into a lot of just different things and see what sticks in the Transcend album. And I think we found finally when I joined Josiah for the In Defiance album what stuck, and that's where I'm headed now, kind of more.
Yeah, man. Josiah from Disciple produced that album,
Yeah,
didn't he? That's so.
absolutely, man.
What was he like to work with, man? He seems such a dude in like when I've seen like when you see
Dude,
him in
yeah.
interviews.
He's got a home studio, and there's a studio called The Ranch. You go to his house, there's a big garden in his yard, you know what I mean? And so his wife's always doing the gardening. you go into the front door, and then he's got like this giant husky dog that just kind of like tackles you at the door. And then you go in there and you're in there, and we're just kind of collaborating on tracks, man. And he's one of those guys that'll just bring the best out in you. You know what I mean? He's one of those guys that like we like really click on so many levels in the songwriting thing and the songwriting process. And yeah, he pushes you a lot vocally, and he's really cool to work with. He's just like, all we need is the perfect rhythm, tempo, words, lyrics, no pressure though, And so, it's always this kind of like constant thing to bring the best out in the song. But I'm so glad that I did, because he's really helped me kind of draw out my story and draw out what I'm all about in this.
That's nice, man. Like a good producer will do that. I remember I was in the studio once, played some vocals down, and the guy who was producing me was just like, yeah, just like that, only 50% better. And I was like,
oh man.
I mean, yeah. That's as good as I got. but no, that's really cool. How did you meet him anyway? How did that you hook up? I mean, obviously he's quite a famous guy.
Yeah. So I've been a Disciple fan for many years. One thing you have to realize about me is I come into this not only as just a participant now, but as a fan. So in the small town of Canastoo, New York, I would be, walking around town and just blasting the crap out of Disciple in my headphones. And so to meet him years later, what happened was Colton, the old producer that did Transcend, he kind of got pretty busy. And so we were looking for a new producer, and there's this Christian award show called the Grizzly Awards, and he had won producer of the year. And so that just kind of stuck with me as I was watching the Grizzly Awards one year. And about the time Colton kind of was, got inundated and busy, I was like, I'm looking for a new producer. Boom, Josiah. And then I called him, and the rest was kind of history. It was just kind of like, yeah, man, I'll work with you. And at that time I had kind of like faintly gotten into the scene. I've worked with Zana. There's this other rocker girl named Zana. So I kind of was making my way into it. And then that was just on the springboard of me doing 4 nationwide tours with 7 Day Slumber. So I was kind of at that point making a name for myself. Josiah faintly heard about me, and he's like, yeah, man, let's do it. And then we just kind of conceptualized the EP in Defiance together.
Hey, real quick, if you're having a good time today, please do consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment. Also, if you want to help more people experience the love of Christ through alternative Christian music, please consider sharing this video with a friend or dropping it in your favorite social media group of choice. Right, next up, I asked Matt to tell us all about his song, Not My Name.
Not My Name was kind of not even planned to go on the In Defiance album. I had like brought in a bunch of songs for Josiah, and we had our 5 picked. And Not My Name was kind of the first time that I took the gloves off about my disabilities. Like I said, when I was growing up, I never wanted to talk about them. And the fact that I would get up in front of rooms of people and talk about it so openly, even to this day, is kind of just like, wow, this is amazing. But about the time Not My Name was conceptualized, I was heading into studio. I had a week off. And for whatever reason, I just had this, just really strong impression that said, Matt, you've talked about everything in your life, but you've never talked about what's the central theme in your life and, the most vulnerable part of you, which is your disabilities. And so, going into that song, I never really had something to follow. There really isn't any, songs about disabilities that I've heard, at least, that like the general public can also kind of resonate with and like understand. And so the thought of labels and the labels that people put on you as somebody that has, disabilities, depression, being the black sheep, those things follow you for your entire life. And, I just started to think, like, when I was a kid, one of the things I hated was people to define me by my disability. Like I would say, they'd be like, well, what do you want to do when you, grow up? And I'd be like, I want to be in a rock band. And they'd be like, oh, that's nice. But like, you're more suited for this. And, they never really got like, it felt like I was totally, people were totally putting up walls and not getting to know me for who I am, and more just kind of seeing me through the lens of my disability. And that's what Not My Name is all about.
It's like you're a condition that is to be managed rather than a person who is to be encouraged. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
problem to be solved. And that's kind of how it does kind of feel, doesn't it? When you've got kind of visible issues that, or when people know about it, the way that people kind of change. I think that's why people are changing, their attitude towards you, should I say. And I think that's kind of why people kind of keep that stuff in rather than get it out. And I think that's why it's really good to be able to kind of open up and talk about these things. And I think when you when you're saying stuff like Josiah encouraged me to just be more transparent, more open, and get it out there. I think that's brilliant because people will be drawn towards like you and your weakness, won't they? Rather than you pretending to be strong. Because I think when you're just kind of pretending to be strong and perfect, well, nobody else is actually strong and perfect. We all know
Yeah.
we're all not, and it kind of comes across as vanilla and boring. Whereas when you're just like, no, I'm weak and I'm wrong, but actually through the grace of God and His strength, I'm able to go and just rock stadiums or whatever it is that you do. It's just like that's cool.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. It really was that kind of album and song that kind of opened up the world for me. You know what I mean?
mm,
Because, Transcend was out there, but I
mm,
can't say that like a ton of people were necessarily like resonating with those songs as much. I'm just being an honest musician. But as soon as In Defiance came out and Not My Name, I
mm,
traveled from coast to coast with 7 Day Slumber, and there was people that I met with disabilities, that I met with depression, that I
mm,
met with I went to prisons where people like I went to a jail one time, and they say pain is universal. And I had this guy come up to me after I was in a maximum security prison. I just got done performing Not My Name. And he was like, hey man, it was kind of a scary environment too. And he's like, hey man, he put his arm around me. He's like, I've done things in my life I'm not proud of. I've even killed people. But the thing that like really resonated with me is what you said up there. And tonight I feel like I need to make a change in my life. And so it was just like that type of thing that was just like, wow, like these people are in prison, in a real sense, but I was in prison with my disabilities, and just like to kind of share that pain and share that like, common ground of like, I maybe have not been where you are, but I know what it's like to kind of feel locked. And that's what it's been like, man. It's been crazy.
oh, I'm loving that. I think that's good. I mean, I could just sit here and spend all night just going through every single song and just going, oh, what about this? But obviously, time's going to get away from us. So I really wanted to talk about that last song, "Happy Family." That's just kind of is that the last one that you just dropped? That it is, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I've got new music coming out soon. So be on the lookout for that. It's already mixed, mastered, recorded, but Happy Family is the latest. And it just went #1 on the Christian rock charts. So it's #1. This will be my 4th consecutive #1 song on Christian rock radio. So thank you to everybody.
That is absolutely incredible. I'm going to be playing that on the show 100,000,000%. Definitely going to be doing that. I mean, we've already touched on like the themes behind that one, but is there anything else about that song that you felt like would be worthy just kind of going through? I mean, obviously the video. Have I seen the video for that one? I think I have. When did you drop that
Well,
recently?
we did a lyric video. We didn't necessarily do a music video, but
Right.
yeah, man, it was just like I said, a continuation of not only my story, but like I just imagine that if I'm somebody that's faced that with the, domestic abuse and things like that, how many other people,
Mm,
need to hear that, like, you're not alone. I mean,
yeah.
if I love a lot about Christian music, and it spoke to a lot of different issues in my life. But the one thing that I never really heard was songs about domestic abuse and stuff like that. And so it was just really cool to kind of,
Mm,
you know, just put that part of my story out there as well. And I've seen so many people, message me being like, dude, that helped me
mm,
address an inner wound. Like even our own mixing engineer,
mm,
got a hold of me at 4 o'clock in the morning as he was mixing the song. And he was like, dude, I busted out crying. Like
mm.
this, I went through some things, and like there's healing going on right now.
Mm.
And it was kind of just a weird thing because you wouldn't think of it as like a healing type of song. But I
I
think
could.
just the fact that people feel less alone in their struggle is kind
That's
of what makes
so
it.
important, man. I mean, I'm blessed as to not have been in that situation myself, but I have, friends who have been, and it's like it's the isolation and the guilt that many people feel who are in that kind of situation. They blame themselves for what these kind of
Yeah.
people are doing, and particularly when you add a Christian vibe to it as well, where it's kind of like you know, you can't. This is like, well, it's really hard to kind of do anything about it when you want to honor your father and mother, and obviously that's the abuser or something, and it's just there are so many different layers of guilt and shame, and to be able to hear people honestly standing up saying, "No, I was there too, and it's not your fault." I mean, I think that's where the kind of the healing can come through. And I think if we can maybe just steer people as well towards God and say, hey, like you said at the very, very start, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't throw Jesus out with, his messengers, because sometimes we're all fallible, aren't we? And we don't represent him as well as we should. And I think that just having this music there, just kind of just as testimony to the fact that, yeah, whilst humans are fallible, God isn't, and stick with him, and it's, that it'll all be good in the end, I think. So that's great.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and that's kind of always been my main goal, is because I hated the fact that, like, my family life was so hidden. I always tried to be the most transparent. So that, like, obviously comes in with the music. I'm talking about family, I'm talking about abuse, I'm talking about all these things, because I wanted to be the polar opposite of what I saw. I mean, I literally have, this is a story for another time, but I had a Sunday school teacher who paid kids to beat me up from my own church. You know what I mean? And, like, I have all sorts of, like, reason to not follow and not, do these things, but God's just kept me. And if there's anybody out there right now that just kind of feeling like, hey man, what is it all worth? I would just encourage you to hang on, dude. If I can do it, you can do it. And it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows, but we're called to kind of just continue to be strong no matter what.
What a perfect way to end it. Matt Sassano, absolutely amazing. Thank you very much for your time today, dude.
Hey man, thank you so much, man. Thanks for having me.
So that was Matt Sassano. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us today. If you want to find out how you can connect with Matt, all of his socials are going to be linked in the description below. If you've got this far and you've had a good time, please consider hitting the subscribe button, coming back next time when we are going to be sitting down and talking with the one and only Michael Felker, lead vocalist for Convictions. It's going to be amazing. Until next time, look after yourself. I'll see you later. Goodbye.